Overworking to the point of overextension. You and I both know that anything good happens with hard work. We're not saying don't work hard. I think that's inevitable. If we want something great to happen, we're going to have to work hard. And we have to be mindful of, when am I pushing myself beyond what my body's telling me I should be doing?
Let's impact some men today. I think we're going to do a great job.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast. As always, it's a pleasure to have you. And before we jump into today's episode, first, yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. We are back in person for today. And also, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you love what we're doing here with the Modern Man Podcast. It's all about connecting men in pursuit of their potential. So run with us. And if you're trying to go far, men, I encourage you to check out the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. We meet every Wednesday. And of course, we have a whole community of like-minded men, entrepreneurial and ambitious men pouring into each other to elevate their capacity for life. With that being said, I'm excited to get some wind in our sails today from my guest, corporate trainer, high performance coach, and mindset mentor, Pat Smith, joining me today, man. Pat, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you. And I first want to give an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to the audience, talk right to the camera, talk to the folks at home, get up close to the microphone so we could hear you and let them know who you are. And we could hop into the conversation afterwards, man.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, outside of all the professional stuff, I'm a son, a brother, a friend, a dad, not the type of dad you are, a dog dad. But all of those things first and foremost, and then comes my profession, which is a high performance coach, corporate consultant and trainer with NeuroChange Solutions, a company run by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and a mindset mentor to business owners and business professionals. So I share all that to say, because I know how difficult it is for so many men to differentiate themselves and their identity from their work. And I know that that's a piece of me, but that's not the whole thing of me, which is why I like to lead that way.
Oh, man, I can't wait to ask about the piece of me, not the whole of me, dude, because that was dope. And a lot of us as men identify ourselves by what we do. But how did we get here, Pat, right? Because we don't just come out the womb as a coach. We don't come out the womb as a football player or as a business owner. We work ourselves and we build ourselves into who we become. So how did we get to the Pat today?
That's a long story. I'll share first and foremost what got me into what I'm passionate about, which is all about health and wellness. And so when I go back as far as I can remember, it goes 20 years back. I used to go to the gym, to the local YMCA with my dad. I had to get this little punch card just to even get into the weight room, and they wouldn't let me use any of the free weights. I was only available on the machines.
I feel that.
But I was in there, and there's something to that got me intrigued to that, and that was always a staple for me throughout elementary, late elementary, middle school, high school, even into college. So I was always interested in that, and I'm super glad that I had those things, because that was like the staple and foundation for myself to weather the storm through all of the other things that weren't going so well throughout all that time. And more in particular, really from middle school till really college was a lot of drugs and alcohol, treating my body in ways that I didn't realize that I was actually treating it that poorly. It wasn't until about 2016 when I left and graduated college that a tragic incident happened that I'm sure we may talk about today, that kind of then even flipped the switch even more to realize that it's not just all about fitness. There's so many more aspects to this health and wellness thing. And when I opened the door to that and realized there were so many different things that I could be doing to help myself and feel better in more natural ways, I kind of just got lost in it. It was like a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's really what got me into doing what I do now. It was all my own personal journey and personal development work that then realized, oh, wait, there's so many other guys out there that can also utilize this. And can I be the person to lead them through that?
Yeah. It's funny, man, because we've said this on the podcast before about that fitness aspect, and that just the self-development can go crazy when you realize the power that fitness can have in other arenas of your life. Not necessarily just the fitness, but the discipline, the consistency, the focus, and the program and the process those approaches applied in other areas of life can yield just as many benefits, if not more,
Oh yeah.
when applied in the appropriate aspect. We just never get taught to aim those things in that direction. We kind of stumble upon it
Right.
through the desire of being fit, looking good, or competing at a high level. You mentioned 2016, and I love one of the posts you have pinned at the top of your profile of 2014 and 2024
Yep.
and the gap that those 10 years can provide. And what was interesting when you mentioned fitness, there's a lot of people listening to this podcast, Pat. There's a lot of guys I know day in and day out. They're physically fit. They look great, but they're still hurting inside, right? Like the fitness, as you mentioned, it was just the surface. And while they have the practice, the discipline, the processes, and the consistency, they haven't learned to echo that in other areas. So you mentioned that shift that happened in 2016. What was it between 2020 or 2014 and 2024 that helped you echo those skills in other areas of your life?
Sure. Well, if we go back to 2014, it was my senior year of college back in Indiana University, which that whole time was essentially a blur. I mean, I was just every night, drugs and alcohol 4, 5, 6 times a week. And, you're really just never a true even keel headspace. And so you're using all these things to cope. And at the time, I didn't realize I was coping and trying to avoid so many emotions and feelings that I had going on. And then in 2015, I ended up graduating. And when I graduated, I moved back to the hometown that I was living in Indiana, got a corporate job and started to shift away from those things. And as a result, I created even more anxiety because of it, because I was never sure of what it was like to actually be sober, have this curious mind, a mind that wasn't just coping and overcoming things. Throughout that, it started to get a little bit better. And I thought that, all right, I got some things under control here. And at the time, I was still living in Indiana. And my cousin was actually living here just up the street in Plaza Midwood, which is kind of ironic, in 2016. And he's like, how do you like your job? And he's showing me all the pictures. This is when the epicenter was popping off downtown and things were going. He was like, this is such a cool city. He's from Northern Michigan. And he's like, you should move down here. And I'm thinking, well, I'm 23, 24, whatever it was. I got nothing to lose. So I quit my job and I moved down here. It was April 20th, 2016. And I moved down here. And when I moved down here, my cousin was, we were just getting ready to lease an apartment up in Plaza Midwood. And, he was on a work trip, and while he was gone, I got here on the 20th. The next day, the 21st, I woke up to a phone call from my uncle and found out that my cousin passed away in a car accident on his work trip. So I had moved down here thinking that, all right, this is this brand new chapter, feeling so excited, so, just full of joy. Like this is a new lease on life, if you will. I get to move to somewhere brand new, never lived outside of Indiana. And I'm like, all right, I've got these skills that I'm working on. I'm no longer using all the drugs and alcohol and I'm feeling good. And then that happened. And it actually painted a picture of how much I hadn't healed in the sense of I just went right back to what I knew. I stayed here for 3 days. So I moved to Charlotte for 3-4 days and I moved right back. And when I moved right back, I mean, I went back to all the old patterns. What do I do when I feel this emotions of grief, of sadness, of frustration, right? Getting my cousin who was a year older than me at the time, so 23, 24, taken away so closely, someone who I'd spent all my summers with. And as a result, I kind of went down to an even darker place, darker than I thought I could get to. And it was finally when I hit that low point that it was that trajectory for me to see like, okay, like they say, there's only really 2 places for you when you're going down that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that just didn't seem right with me to be living in that trajectory for for much longer. And it really just kind of opened my eyes to, okay, what do I need to do to shift this so I'm no longer, feeling this way?
Yeah, man, there's so much right there because I think a lot of guys get caught in the hustle of their job or maybe some of the same habits of drugs, alcohol, websites or substances that allow them to function at a high level, but it doesn't mean that they're okay. And when you mentioned coming down off those substances, our minds are really sometimes the scariest things.
Oh, yeah.
In the silence of solitude, we hear it the loudest. And it could be unbearable to sit with it.
Oh, yeah.
And to give a nod to Dr. Joe Dispenza, he said, you either see the trajectory of where you're going and you change, or life changes or life gives you no other choice
Mm-hmm.
but to change. You're in that rock bottom. You're looking around. You decide to change. What was it for you? Was it life giving you an ultimatum, or did you see where your trajectory was going and you said, this isn't it? And whatever that was, what were the first few steps to get Pat back to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a combination of all of those things. First and foremost, having a cousin that I lost so close to me, and
Which, sorry for your loss, by the way.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that in itself just is like a wake up call. It's not the wake up call that you want to have. And as you mentioned, sometimes we change because our back's up against the wall. That's the most difficult time to change. I think the beauty of knowing those things and becoming self-aware of not being with your back up against the wall makes change much easier, but sometimes you are forced to make that. So first and foremost, it was losing my cousin to see that, okay, things can get taken away from us so quickly. Be careful how you're using your time because you don't get it back. The next thing with that is just realizing that, as you mentioned, the mind is in shambles at the time, and I was just feeling like this can't be the only way to feel forever, and it can't be the only way to feel good off drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So I kind of asked myself, like, and it's so cliche, and it's like, what would it be like to be high on life? And then it raised the question, well, there's so many things that I haven't partaken in to see what that would be like. Yeah, I work out, but when it comes to health and wellness and all of these things, longevity, whatever it might be, that's just one piece to the puzzle. What happens if I learn how to eat better food? What does that do for my mind? What happens if I get into meditation? What happens if I actually sleep better and have a community of people that are actually supporting me instead of just getting me back into those same old habits? So it was a mixture of all of those pieces that started to help the upward trajectory for where I was going. But the one thing in particular that really, really helped was meditation, which is a little bit ironic because I had a really hard time sitting still, especially with my own thoughts in that time. And at the same time, that was exactly the medicine itself that I needed. You know, I was typing in Dr. Google, if you will, in 2016, like, how do you get rid of this? Overthinking, worrying, fearful, what ifs? And meditation just kept coming up, and it just kept coming up. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'll give it a shot.
How long did you ignore it before giving it a shot?
A while. Yeah, I don't know the exact time frame, but the funny thing is it wasn't just that I started and there I was, right? It was, oh, I'll go to the gym because at the time I was working at this job. I would go in super early, go to the gym at like 4 a.m. and I would get to the gym, work out, and I go sit in the sauna and I do a meditation, a 2-minute guided meditation, if you will. And the funny thing is, that was challenging as heck at the time. And I would do it for a couple of weeks and I started to feel a little bit better, and then I get off track. But I knew that was my body's way of just trying to really throw a bone at me and say, hey, get back to your old self. This is easier. This is more comfortable. And knowing that that wasn't going to be the trajectory that got me to that point. So that in itself with meditation is like, I resisted it and then I started in it and it worked for a little while. And then I again resisted it. It was like my body's innate ability to like, I'm going to go back to that old self, because you were living in that old life, if you will, for 5, 10, 12 years, whatever it was. And my body was just really trying to grasp on as hard as it could throughout that process. And that's what meditation is. It's just becoming aware and moving beyond the analytical mind to get into the subconscious mind to rewrite those patterns. And that's what I was doing day in and day out. I didn't know that at the time, but now I do. And it's interesting to reflect back on that, on how much that actually moved the needle for me.
Yeah, I imagine it's hard to identify when the practice actually locked in, just somewhere along the lines. Right. It was almost like working out. Yep. I don't know when I became someone who works out, but it started to become a foundation. And I don't feel myself if I don't do it. What does your meditation practice look like now?
So most of the time I work to get up in the morning and just go straight into meditation. After I brush my teeth, use the restroom, get a little water. I mean, I'm usually out on the couch meditating in the morning with the dog. It all depends on the day. And I think that's the same thing with working out. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour workout every single day. It can be,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, meditation can be anywhere between 15, 45 minutes to an hour. Some days I want to start it with doing breath work before I jump into meditation. Some days the meditation is more for me to calm my mind and relax. Some of the days are more mental rehearsal and doing some visualization and getting some things to set up to really tune into what my future could look like and start to bring that feeling into where I'm at. So it is variant, but I think what matters the most is that it's consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where so many people that I work with and that I talk with about meditation is, it's just not for me. And you ask them, okay, I understand. I felt the same way too at first. How long have you been going at it? Well, I tried it 2 times. Well, we know that when you hit that bench twice, your chest didn't grow, right? It's a compounding effect. And so that's the way I have it set up today. And in some days it's different. And some days I miss it. And guess what? It's like miss a day or two and get back on it. But it's the foundational habit that really, I know that's got me to this point.
Yeah.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Thayton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com. What other foundational things do you have as non-negotiables that keep you in the mindset to operate at a high level? Because, and I want to get more into that journey from 2016 to 2024. Sure. Don't think I forgot about that. But just for folks to help understand the process of, and I'm sure this is over years of dialing it into what your routine looks like. What other practices are the non-negotiables for you to feel like yourself, operate at your best self?
I'd say there's about 4 to 5 main things that are most important, at least for me in my life. And I found first and foremost, you don't want to catch me on less than 7 hours of sleep. So that's one for sure. Just sleep quality and sleep quantity and the routine of all that. Eat real food as often as possible. Sometimes we don't. We're on vacation.
What's real food?
Whole foods, nutrient dense. What's the label? What's the ingredient on the food? Right? An apple has one ingredient. It's the apple. Just go off that motto. Right? And that's kind of my basis, if you will. Again, at times we're at the ballpark with our family or we're on vacation and you can't get to that. The stress of beating yourself up for not being able to eat real food on that is more detrimental than just eating the food, in my opinion. So, right, sleep, eat real food, move your body often. I mean, working out, of course, has been a staple for me. Stress management, I think, is another big thing. Meditation, breath work, mindfulness. And then the other thing that I find that's been super, super helpful is community. So making sure that you have that support in your back pocket. So those are the main pillars for me that I lean back on that are always non-negotiables. If I know I have those things in my schedule, some things community doesn't happen as often, but if you can do that once a week, once every other week, if those are the main things that are going on in your schedule and those are the building blocks, I always like to think of it as like a jar, if you will, right? If you have a jar and it's an empty jar and you put in all the big rocks, the things that are the most important to you, then you fill up all the other things outside of that. Then you know when to say no to things. But if you fill it up with a bunch of junk and now you've got a bunch of pebbles and sand, where do you put the health? Where do you put the family? Where do you put the friends? They don't fit. So put those things in first and then build around that. That's kind of the motto that I went on. And you and I, before the show, were, chatting a little bit about our, maybe OCD, maybe not, who knows, but our scheduling, right? And putting those things and those pillars in place and letting everything else work around those. To me, that's really, really important. Without those, I don't have the time. Life starts lifing and getting in the way, and we know how it goes. Me too. But when those pillars are in place, it's a lot easier to navigate those things. And you start feeling better. And when you start feeling better, you start operating better. And if I show up better, then the people around me, my family, my friends, my coworkers, my clients, they get the best version of me. And I think that's super important.
Yeah. Amen, brother. I want to like just drop this mic really. but it's so true because with the time blocking and how we set up our schedules, I talk about your priorities, and you put your priorities in first. And when you break it down, what takes up most of your time in the week, and are your priorities taking up all that time, or are you slipping and identifying other areas where those habits and those practices aren't serving your goals and your ambitions towards where you want to go?
Right.
That could be overwhelming for somebody that listens and they see the end product and like, oh man, okay, I need community, I need sleep, I need meditation, and their pen's running out of ink while writing it down. What did it look like as you started establishing these throughout the years? And what did it look like as you're climbing yourself out of that dark night, coming little by little back to the surface? How did those acquire in your life?
Well, let's just point out a few things, right? I said that my journey started well over 20 years ago. Fitness in itself, right, was a staple for me, but it got built over time. 2016 was the low point. It's 2024. It gets built over time. So those things, the fitness, whatever it might be, those things get built and they become easier over time. So it's like the best analogy I can use is it's difficult at first, but then it gets easier over time. So then you can do more in less time, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. So then you can start piling those things on. Where I got misled to start with is that I felt like I had to do it all at once.
Yeah.
And that's actually the body's way and the mind's way of tricking Ted or tricking Pat into saying, I know how to get him back to stay where he was at. I'm going to throw everything on his plate. And then guess what? He doesn't succeed at it. He comes right back. So adding those things incrementally and getting better at them, making them more of a habit, more of a frequent thing, that actually is the way to go about it, because it's slow progress. It's the slow burn over time that gets you to that point. You don't just become fit and then stay fit. You have to build that up and then sustain it. And so it's a mix between patience, consistency, and not overwhelming yourself. So just starting with the small hanging fruit, low hanging fruit. What's the biggest challenge? Okay, it's working out. Okay. Don't tell me you're going to go from not working out to working out 6 days a week. Start small. Mm-hmm. Work out 2 days a week. And if that means 2 times walking your dog around the block, then that's what it means for you. Build off that. Don't build off 0 to 100 and then be upset because you didn't work it out and now you'll never try it again because you've made up this story that never works out for me. Well, yeah, it never worked out for you because you overwhelmed yourself and you didn't give yourself a shot.
Yeah. And all you did was find evidence to reaffirm where you think you should be,
right?
As opposed to taking the strategic approach as to where you could be and where you're going.
Yeah. And then as you build from that, okay, I worked out twice this week. There's a positive reference to go back to when you're like, I didn't get these 3 days in this week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you did 2 days last week. So what's a little more? But those are the positive references that I know that I always have to come back to. And I share with clients oftentimes, go back to the things that worked and remember them so that you don't put yourself in a shameful mode to be like, oh, I didn't get it, so now I'll never be able to get it. Well, look what got you to that point. Yeah. You know how to do it. It's just, stuff got in the way, and we all have that, myself included.
Man, you just coached me, because you know how many times I have to remind myself of like, Ted, you did it and it worked. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's not working now is because you stopped doing what worked. Mm-hmm. And you almost have to kind of, remind yourself to do those activities that generate what it is you're trying to do. And to your point, it will take time to get good at it, or to get into the habit of doing it, where the system 1, system 2 brain, first time you back out of your driveway, you're looking left and right, making sure you don't run over the curb or something. 20th time, you're reading a magazine, putting your makeup on, and you're doing it on autopilot because your brain has locked it in.
Sure.
It's the same thing with the actual right habits and approaches. You mentioned something early on about identity and how what we do notoriously as men and just as people, we identify ourselves by what we do. Talk a little bit about how that could be a detriment, because I know you work a lot with mindset, right?
Yeah.
And I think identity is an aspect of that either keeps us locked into where we are, can be a cheat code to get to someplace else. How does identity come into play with the clients you work with, or even through your journey and how you got to where you were to then leaving the corporate job to coaching full time?
Yeah. Right. I was mentioning to you earlier, Mark England, right? He said mindset, the stories we tell ourselves. That's the thing is if we tell ourselves that all we are is our job, what happens when you lose your job tomorrow? Who do you have? No
Nothing.
one. So I think that's the biggest thing, right? Establish who you are as a person. What are your values? What are your principles? And then from there, knowing that when I have those values and principles in place, those then elevate every other area that I go to. But if I identify and tell the story that I am only this job, again, what happens if I lose the job? What happens if I get demoted? What happens if this company goes under? Now I've lost myself. Now where do I go? Right. And you don't want to go to rock bottom again, because we talked about it's hard to change at that point. So building that up is important. And for me, especially leaving the corporate world, is the story that I had to myself was the identity was like, I can only get this far. I can only make this type of money in the corporate world. If I leave, who's ever going to want to work with me? All of these things, right? But there are all these identities that are just trying to reaffirm that you can only be your work. And so it's like, as you maneuver out of that and take this 30,000 feet up approach, it's like, what is actually most important to you? Is it work? And a lot of times I think it's family and it's health and so many different factors. But when I think about identity and tying it there, it just comes back to worth, right? It's if your worth is specifically tied to your profession, then you're only going to focus on that all of the time. And then all these other things go by the wayside. And, I think it's been mentioned that, the people biggest regret on their deathbed is not spending more time doing the things that they loved and being with the people that they want. And I've always believed in the philosophy that we work to live, not live to work, right? And so when we live to work, all we think about is work all the time, and that consumes our life. And then all of those other things that actually bring us joy fall by the wayside. Whereas if we work to then live a better life, we feel more fulfilled outside of work, which that means then it circles back around. And when we're in work, we're even that much better. And it keeps filling that cycle. Whereas the opposite's true, right? If I just live to work and all I do is work all the time, I never have any true fulfillment. And even if work is fulfilling, I still don't believe that there's enough fulfillment outside of work to keep you going for a long time. And there's no sustainability in that sense.
Yeah. That's when you start leaning into the burnout.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which
yeah.
You're very familiar with. And I want to make sure we touch on that before coming to the end of the episode, because burnout is a feeling that so many listeners are not only familiar with, but married to, unfortunately. And even myself had to get to a point where I looked around and I just realized this is not sustainable. I can't do this. And I would look at myself. I'm a high performing man. But I came close to breaking, man. And it is a real thing. So where does burnout come from? Why is it so sneaky? And how do we extinguish it? If we can extinguish it, what is it giving us a sign of?
Yeah. Overworking to the point of overextension. You and I both know that anything good happens with hard work. We're not saying don't work hard. I think that's inevitable. If we want something great to happen, we're going to have to work hard. And we have to be mindful of, when am I pushing myself beyond what my body's telling me I should be doing? We know, right? Sometimes we don't want to end up going to the gym, right? We get that. And that's okay. We push through that. We also know, oh no, I'm injured. I shouldn't go to the gym. And so it's that same mentality, if you will, is that, you don't want to overextend yourself to the point where you're breaking. And that's going on when your mental, emotional, and physical well-being start taking a toll as a result of your overworking.
Yeah.
And so you reverse engineer that. Okay, so how can I get my mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being in check, so much so that I can handle the things going on in my outer world. And that to me is really the way to approach it. And I share that with clients, and I share that, of course, on my social media and whatnot. It's like putting those pieces in place, and those are the foundational pieces, will allow for you to go further for longer.
Yeah.
Versus I'm just going to grind it out and grind it out and grind it out. And then finally at some arbitrary number, I'm going to fix my health, or I'm going to take initiative for my mental and emotional well-being. At that point, you're having to now go rewrite all of these patterns that you've instilled for 5, 10, 15, however many years. So it's doing that stuff now is actually helping you get further for longer, and you get there going faster because you're more efficient, right? You're doing more in less time. And that's kind of my idea is, yes, there's initial time investment, but the return on investment on optimizing and just really taking care of your own mental, emotional, and physical well-being far exceeds the how hard you would work for maybe a few years and then burn out and have to deal with that 6-month period.
Yeah.
So that's the way I view it. And I found myself to that point a couple different times in the corporate world myself. However, the one thing that I know for me is not only did my performance reflect that, but my ability to sustain the 150 nights a year in a hotel, traveling all the time, covering 8 states, doing all of this stuff while also having all these other pillars in place. Those are the pillars that allowed for me to do that so efficiently and so effectively. And I think anybody can take away, what works for them, but going into that would be the most important for them in terms of just like building out that foundation.
Yeah. Almost the counterintuitiveness of slowing down to speed up.
Yep.
Or a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and I know it's a very popular saying in the military of, I love it saying slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And depending on how old you are, I'm talking to the viewers at home and listeners, this burnout conversation lands differently because I think it's hard. I'm putting myself in the shoes of 25-year-old Ted. With the amount of testosterone I had, the energy I had, it was hard for me to fathom not always having the same kind of gas. But the counterintuitiveness is you are investing not for your 20s, but you're investing for the energy and the effectiveness you're going to have in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's really when the stretch of who took care of themselves starts to show around the last curve, if you would, who's coming down the home stretch. What made you want to leave the corporate world, man?
First and foremost, I just knew that what I was doing was not like fulfilling me fully. And the other thing that I found was I just thought, all right, I can push that aside. I can just push that feeling down and ignore my intuition that this isn't what I want to do the rest of my life. And I could have just as easily covered it up with all the money that I was making. What I realized as you go from making X amount to whatever, 6 figures, multiple 6 figures, it's not really about the money. It's about the fulfillment. And so I was wondering, okay, if I'm feeling this way, what would it be like for me to have something different? And, it's quite funny you asked that is because I had bounced back and forth. You shouldn't do it. You might not make it. What happens, right? You have peers, you have family members. Oh no, you're making that much money. Don't leave. And at the same time, they have their own experiences with their own stories, and their story didn't have to be my story. And, it's been almost 2 years now. And it was, October of 2022. I was at a Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat. I was in the midst of this meditation. It must have been 6, 7 a.m. And you're sitting there out with 1,800 other people, and you're outside doing this walking meditation. And I had this download, whatever you want to call it, this voice inside my head. And it pretty much just asked, like, if you can make this much money and be this successful at helping build someone else's dream, what makes you think you can't do that for yourself? And I was like, oh, it kind of put me on the spot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I got to do this. I have to do this. It's, it was like, find out, because worst case scenario, what happens? I can go back. And so for me, it was just knowing like there was something more for me to do. And outside of that, I just, I'm I guess, a little bit of a nerd when it comes to health and wellness and all of these things. And I want everybody else to win around me. And so it's like, can I be that person to guide other individuals to feel the way I felt, and being high off life, if you will, with all of the things that we can do from a natural standpoint to just feel good as often as possible. And as a result, we oftentimes thrive personally, professionally, and in our relationships. And it was like, okay, I can get it behind that. That's my mission. And so yeah, that's what led into that. And within a couple hours, I called in and put in my 2 weeks notice.
Really?
So yeah, it was, I had been planning it, but I didn't think it was going to happen that quick. But I was like, you got to pull the Band-Aid off at some point, figure it out. And yeah, it happened like that.
So you're still at the retreat. And
Oh yeah, mid-retreat. Yeah. Yeah, mid-retreat.
for some reason, I just have that scene from Wolf of Wall Street in my head of like the phone booth. Like, I'm not coming. I quit.
Yeah.
But obviously you put your 2 weeks in,
Sure.
did it the right way. But man, so that fast.
Yeah. I mean, I had thought, so I will preface, in 2018, I went back to school and I was working in the corporate world to get a holistic nutrition certification. I wanted to coach individuals on nutrition, eating real food as often as possible, making sure that that fuels them. Did that for a little bit, a couple years. And then when I started to really indulge in like Dr. Joe Dispenza work, going to my first retreat, I found out that he has a corporate training company that leads in and takes in the work of him, meditation, mental rehearsal, emotional intelligence, all that stuff into the workplace. And I'm like, oh, it's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. I could see myself doing that type of stuff. So I had been planning it for a while. Did I know it was going to happen that quickly? No. But I will say it took a lot of inner work in the sense of like building up that belief in myself that I can do this, that vision or download was actually just the final straw, but it had been an accumulation of many things over that time. Again, it just goes into talking about what we talked about, right? It's, it's persistence and it takes time, and the good things that happen to us do get developed over a certain period of time. So, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. And after that, there was just no looking back.
Yeah. Sky's the limit at that point. And it's almost like we prepare ourselves for a moment, and then the door arrives, and it's either open it or let it pass. And you decided to open it, which is fantastic. One of my last questions would be, you get into the coaching realm, you're doing this full time. Man, talk us through the excitement before a call, after a call, client success, the process you get to take them through. What has been that joy and your favorite process about what you get to do now and how you work with other men?
There's so much fulfillment in being able to help shift other individuals' lives who aren't quite sure what the direction to take. That fulfillment is in itself is like a high, right? And then when you take a step back and look even further and realize that if it's a business owner, or even if it's a business professional or someone who has a family, you're not just impacting them. There's a ripple effect to all those other people around you. And I never take that lightly. And so getting excited to realize every call, how can I serve them to the best of my abilities? And when I do that, great things happen. And so, those results are a byproduct of just serving them to the highest ability. And every day I get to remind myself as well is I can only serve them to the best of my ability if I serve myself first. I got to take care of myself first. My health, my wellness, my fulfillment then allows for me to do that with them. And when I lead by example from that front and serve them, it's like the magic potion. And there's something really, really special about seeing them. That's a really good question. I never thought of it that way. And when you can create that tiny little shift, that's all you're looking to do, is just to get them to see their world in a different way, right? When our thoughts change, now we start to take new actions. We start to create these new experiences, and we're like, holy cow, that felt great.
Yeah.
And then the mind goes, how can I recreate that? How can I make that better? That's how people grow. And that's the evolution process. And getting to see people go through that and being the one to facilitate that for them is huge. And again, I'm just a coach.
Yeah.
I don't do the work for them. I facilitate and I guide them, and I take maybe partial credit, but I always remind them, you're the one putting in the time, the effort, and the energy and the investment. I'm just here kind of being that guide and that guide, friend, but also coach,
Yeah.
and all those things mixed in for sure.
Kind of like the helicopter looking at the road. Like
Mhm.
you're going to want to make a left because
Mhm.
you're driving towards a dead end
Yeah.
type thing. You can see the whole playing
Yeah.
field. How can people contact you, getting into some of the masterminds,
Sure.
the workshops that you have going on, follow your work? Pat, how can some of our listeners, if they want more of what you've been sharing today, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, the majority of my stuff's all on social media. Pat Smith Wellness. It's on Instagram's most frequent, also LinkedIn. And then every other month, I have a mental performance accelerator. It's a 10-week group program, and the program in itself involves 12 hours of live training where we go into figuring out what it's like to upgrade our mindset, what's holding us back, what are the obstacles, and how do we actually curate that. Then from there, there's about 30 days of integration work with the group, followed by 30 days of one-on-one coaching. So that's one of the things that I often share most frequently because it's every other month. So I do it on the odd months of the year, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. So September's this month upcoming. We'll do it again in November, start again at the beginning of the year. But that's like a great entry point to really just introduce individuals to the work that I do, all around mindset, all around the foundational stuff that I do with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and really being able to put themselves in a new state of mind so they can then, proceed to their next level of success, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And I'll have the link in the show notes.
For sure.
Folks
Appreciate that.
just hop in on that. And the last question is what is something that you've seen, something that has happened? We might have touched on it here on the podcast today, but something that really sticks with you that shapes the way you view the world as a man.
Well, I shared 2016, which opened my eyes. And then the other thing, and we were actually talking about this with my my girlfriend, and she asked me, if you were to pick out a point from in your life from the before and after, what's the middle point that changes that? So it's like, what is the biggest thing that was like pre this and post this? And I thought back, and I thought it was 2016, but really I think it was 2020 and COVID. There's so much isolation, so much fear, so much like your uncertainty. And from that reminded me, and again, opened my eyes even bigger on like, where am I going with my life? And is this what I want to be doing? And if we have to shut down all over again, what do I want to have in my back pocket? Do I want to have freedom, health, and do I want to have not having to worry about a boss or whatever it might be? And I think that it's funny to think that something like that is so impactful. But reflecting back, that's definitely one of them, because it was like a dark time because you were so isolated. What do you do? What's next? We're so engulfed with fear of all these things that were going on. Not to discount what happened. It's totally, there's lots of things that didn't go well during that time. But it was like, that was an eye-opening point of like, if this can happen at any time, how do you want to live the rest of your life? And it was like, go after it.
Yeah.
Like, go after it because you don't know what can happen.
Yeah.
And so mix between 2016 and then, of course, which was what I shared about earlier. And then, of course, 2020, when we all experienced what went down then.
Yeah. No, and I know that was a changing point for a lot of people.
Yourself included, kind of, right?
It was. It was really, it was a time of, oddly enough, affirmation, fear and affirmation. Just moved in with my fiance at the time. And there's a lot of jokes about, I remember the videos like, you can A, spend quarantine with your family, or B, and the guy's like, B, or whatnot. But I really enjoyed my time in my stuck in the house with my wife, my now wife. So that was an affirmation of, I don't mind being stuck with this person. And she is my person. And then also some of the practices, I was still very new into meditation. And I had 193 was the highest number I remember. 193-day streak on Headspace.
Wow, that's great.
I appreciate that. I was proud of it for a while, and so I was deep in the Headspace app with meditation, and that was for my practice. And the pandemic almost reaffirmed everything that I was practicing and that I was doing was advantageous because it helped me get through that.
Sure.
So that was reaffirming in terms of, okay, what you're building upon will help you in turmoil. But it also was kind of a a resurgence of that ambition to keep building, because while I was able to get through it, I wasn't fully prepared for that impact. So that's been the transition, the shift, and also the realization of, what can I do? Right. And that's when the podcast went virtual and the borders went off. And I got to speak to people around the world, but great to be back in person with you, man, and do this, coming around full circle, being in Charlotte. And I just appreciate you sharing your journey into how you got to where you are, because these stories, I feel, help men understand wherever they are, whether they're in their 2016, in their 2014, or maybe they're in their 2020, coming up on their 2024, and they're almost at the end. If anyone resonates with any point of your story, I want them to get encouraged that I don't want to say a finish line, because hey, we're still running. We're still working. But there is fulfillment and there is joy in the race. In the run. So, corporate trainer, high performance coach, mindset mentor, Pat Smith, thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Man, thanks a lot, Ted. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Look forward to listening to the episode and maybe getting another one in since we're local.
Absolutely. Hey, you're right around the corner, so we don't have an excuse not to, but it's been a pleasure having you, Pat. I'm going to recap some of the things you said, because I know listeners are driving, working out, which, we both love that if you're working out, but peace. And I wrote peace because we started with the identity. And the reason I love letting the guests introduce themselves, because while I say the titles, you started off with, hold on, I'm a son, right? You have the things that are important to you that you identify with. So understand that what you do is just a piece of who you are. It's not just fitness as well. A lot of you guys listening, you follow myself, some of my friends, because of our workouts, but the fitness is just the foundation. You have so many more aspects of your life that you can get the benefits from. And your back against the wall is the hardest time to change. Take it upon yourself and face the challenges of changing willingly for the benefits for a faster transaction. Be careful how you're using your time. You don't get it back once it's spent. And being high on life, what does that look like? Our vices, the things that we lean into might keep us coping, but what does it look like to lean into life? The sleep, the movement, the meditation, the practices that help keep you grounded. And those don't all come at once. It's built over time. Go back to the things that worked, remember them, and keep doing them. And also establish who you are as a person. You work to live?
Yeah, you work to live.
You work to live. You don't live to work. Keep that in mind. And then establish who you are, what is actually important to you. Make sure you take care of your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And their story doesn't have to be your story. Write your own story. And you can go back if that risk doesn't work out. It's not the end of the world. Ask yourself what you're doing. Keep on growing. And make sure you have a good community of people around you. If you're looking for one, I know Pat has one. I do as well. Whoever you resonate with, at best, just get around more people who are doing amazing things. Guys, thanks again for making it to the end of the podcast. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, give Pat a follow, and make sure you share this with somebody that can get value from it, because we don't like the lone wolves out there. You don't want to run alone. Run together. We appreciate you. We'll catch you next week. And as we always say, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.